Well, members of the Biden administration have been caught investing in certain pharmaceutical stocks that benefited from the vaccine and did not disclose them in the timely fashion. So the latest example of this is Eric Lander. He's the head of the Office of Science and Technology Policy. He has many times publicly promoted the COVID vaccine while also having investments in one of the vaccine makers. So he had many shares of BioNTech SE, which is the German biotechnical company that made the Pfizer vaccine. And he sold his stock at a time when it was at an all-time high, having shot up to $50 per share. And he did not disclose this in the certain amount of time that he was supposed to. I believe they're supposed to have, let me just check my notes, 60 days, and he went way past this. So, Nancy Pelosi has been saying recently, oh, yes, we think that members of Congress should be restricted from making investments that they then have a hand in influencing the price of stock. They should not benefit from any legislation. But what about now members of the administration that are involved in not in Congress, but other politicians? For instance, this person, Mr. Lander, working in science and technology policy. We can pull out many examples of him telling us that we should take the vaccine in the Washington Post, in the Boston Globe, all kinds of opportunities he took to promote this. We can give him the benefit of the doubt and say, oh, well, he thought it was the right thing to do. He really believes in vaccines, and he realized that this would be profitable, so he separately made this announcement. But there should not exist these types of conflicts of interest in any kind of legislation, right?
Yeah, he had 90 days to divest his stocks after May 28th, and he didn't.
No.
He didn't. You know who did? Like Janet Yellen. Janet Yellen, who had also investments in different pharmaceutical companies, and Pfizer, did it within the timeline. It's amazing how many of these people had investments in Pfizer and big pharmaceutical companies. Are we surprised by that? That he shed he had all of this money in there making millions of dollars, and he kept it well past the deadline. Is he going to get anything like an ethics violation? He's on the president's science panel.
But also these publications should have asked. There should have been some kind of footnote at the bottom. For instance, when I was a CNBC reporter, anytime I did...
Oh, you're talking about when he wrote that opinion piece.
When he wrote opinion pieces, that should have been disclosed. So if I ever did a piece when I worked at CNBC, they would ask me, do you have stock in this company? And I would say yes or no. There was a time when I did Apple reporting, and I said I do have Apple in my funds because I had at the time...
401k or whatever, yeah.
It was exchange-traded funds that were technology-based, and Apple was in those exchange-traded funds. And I said, yes, they are in these ETFs. And they said, okay, we'll put a footnote on the website for this report, right? That is ethical to do. If I do a report on Apple that can influence the stock in any minor way, that's so little, right? I'm just doing a report on CNBC. It should be disclosed. So why then did the Washington Post and the Boston Globe not disclose these things?
Yeah, just at the top of the Washington Post piece when he wrote that opinion piece. So this is Eric Lander, President's science advisor, director of White House Office in Science and Technology Policy. But no mention that, he's also an investor in Pfizer, in Moderna, or BioNTech. He's an investor in these exact vaccines that stand to benefit from him being a member of the administration. And then writing propaganda pieces in the Washington Post about vaccines and how they can end the pandemic, right? That was his, by the way, that was his opinion piece. Coronavirus vaccines can end the pandemic. Yeah, that's so...
Well, that didn't happen. But at the same time, this congressional rule now that's being floated in Congress to prohibit any congressperson from direct investments in things that they legislate would not prohibit this person from doing the same thing. He's not he's not elected official.
Right.
So that's not really going to solve the problem.
Alex Thompson from Politico has been doing some good reporting on this, and he wrote about it in the playbook today. But he says, the senior legal counsel and ethics watchdog at the Campaign Legal Center, Delaney Marusco, says, I don't think you have the most senior scientist in the administration during a pandemic invested in a certain vaccine maker. It looks like something he should have divested immediately. So,
Yes.
you're picking winners and losers in all of this, right? Ethics experts, he says, say that Lander's promotion of COVID vaccines during the period when he was still holding stock in the vaccine makers did not likely violate his ethics agreement, but say that it raises questions about shortfalls in the White House's ethics pledges.
You think?
Yeah, you think. But this is the larger question about just members of Congress having an interest in these stocks. So, yes. So now we know that the White House, we know that Nancy Pelosi is apparently on board. She's already made millions off of her stock purchases. But now, apparently, according to the Nancy Pelosi's office, the Speaker's office, she is on board with making Congress, at least in part, have to not be able to trade stocks. I heard someone saying this morning, but how are they going to make money? Well, we're worried about Congress making money? Like, that's the concern? We're worried about Congress making money.
Well, they don't actually make that much money. They're paid way less than politicians in other developed nations, and that is part of the problem, is because they rely so heavily on campaign finance, because they can't really live the life they're expected to live in Washington, which is fancy. They can't really afford the campaigns that they need to run, so that's why they rely so heavily on corporate donors. So if they can't then have a side hustle, then their reliance on corporate donors will get worse.
A side hustle.
It's a legitimate question. I'm not saying we should feel sorry for Congress. None of us should. But they are, for sure, underpaid compared to, in fact, Lawrence Lessig points out in his book, Democracy Lost, that in Singapore, they make something like 7 times the amount of Congress in the United States, and they have zero corruption. So I'm not saying, necessarily they deserve more. This Congress doesn't seem to, but we get what we pay for when it comes to Congress.
Yeah, I mean, look, and people want to slam, AOC. They say, is she doing enough? Is the Progressive Caucus doing enough? And hey, I have to say, in this situation, it looks like at least the progressive wing of the party has actually forced Nancy Pelosi's hand on this. They have a petition of like 218 members that was really led by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, banning them. And so she was going to face, Nancy Pelosi was literally going to face like a battle between herself and the progressive wing of the party, and being sort of forcing her hand on this. I mean, 218 people basically forcing her to, like, are you going to be on board with this? These are your Democratic members who are saying Congress should not be allowed to trade stocks, especially over the companies that they're overseeing. I mean, that's the thing. I guess it would be, I wouldn't have a problem if they're trading companies, or if they have access, if they're not involved in legislation that's affecting the very companies they're trading.
Yes.
So if you're having phone calls with Tim Cook and you're investing in Apple because something's coming, who knows what you spent an hour on the phone talking to Tim Cook about?
Right.
And could affect legislation that's coming down the pike very, very soon. Like, we don't know. The American people don't have access to that information.
No.
You do. And so if they're going to be hauled, if Apple or Google or Facebook or anybody else is going to be hauled before Congress in some sort of a congressional testimony in the next month, and we don't even know about it, or certain legislation is coming down which could hinder their app store and could lower their revenue, whatever it is, we don't. The average American doesn't have access to this.
Yeah.
And they're already getting screwed. I mean, look, Wall Street's already in favor of the rich anyway, and little guys, it's very, very difficult for them to make money because market makers and Wall Street just run the whole table anyway. So the little guy gets screwed. If you are a member of Congress and you say you support the little guy, you're out there wanting to take care of the middle class and the beaten down, the downtrodden, and here you are quietly, surreptitiously making millions of dollars on secret information that you have as a member of Congress. That to me is just.
What's crazy too is like
the word is awful, I guess.
The American people are the biggest lobbyists of Congress. Like, we give them the most money, but we get the least for our money. Like, these special interests or these lobby groups go in and they lobby with a couple $1 million or something to one of these people, and then they create these bills, and we're the ones sending all the money to them. Well, we'll do this tax cut for you guys. That's our money. So, like, we're giving them all this money to just send to their buddies and everything, and we get nothing for our investment.
Well, we don't actually spend that much on their salaries, though. The money that we pay in taxes goes into other things, not necessarily to pay our elected officials. Relatively speaking, they are not. In fact, a junior level congressperson makes between $200,000 and $300,000, which sounds like a lot, but not if you're trying to live a life to keep up with the Joneses in Washington, D.C. But they can
I'm not talking about their
leave.
salaries, though.
I know
You
that.
keep saying that. Hold on. You keep saying that, but I don't give a rat's ass about them keeping up with the Joneses.
But that's what it takes
No,
to
I care
become
about
a visible politician, somebody that people see, someone who can host people, someone who can, there's very
Do the
few of
dealing.
them that are Rand Paul types that are like, oh, I don't need the fancy stuff. Sure, they could, right? But they have to live a lot of their time in Washington, D.C., which has exorbitant cost of living. But they also can spend a year or two in Congress, leave, and then go make 3 times as much as a lobbyist. Lobbyists have entry-level jobs at $700,000. So they're not motivated to stay and help the people and write legislation because they're relatively, I know this word sounds so offensive, but they're relatively low paid. And then you can't really blame them for saying, well, I can make 3 times as much as a lobbyist, so I'll go work for corporate interests.
No, it's a good discussion. It's a good discussion because, like, if they made more money, they wouldn't have to then take big donations, right? They wouldn't have to curry favor with people.
But they don't have to have all these houses. Like my point was that they're taking the pool of the tax dollars we send in, all that stuff. Like they've got this big pool of our money that they can divvy out to whoever they want, and it never gets divvied out to things that we want. It gets divvied out to things that they want.
Yes, it goes
salary
to their
aside.
friends because it's a vicious circle, right? So yes, it would be very easy to say no more corporate interest in politics, period. That would implode the system as we know it.
Nancy Pelosi's saying she wants stock trading banned to be government wide, and she specifically yesterday called out the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court has no reporting of any stock transactions. And Nancy Pelosi, I don't agree with you on a lot. I 100% agree with you on this because.
But can her husband still trade?
Well, yeah, I don't know.
He's
Families.
the
you
money
can
maker.
do
She
that in
said.
blind trusts.
But hold on, let's talk about the Supreme Court. I agree with her 100% on this because Supreme Court, right? We get all this idea that the Supreme Court mostly just listens to cultural cases, right? They're going to hear an abortion case. They don't. Almost all of the cases that come before the Supreme Court are big business versus the little guy. Always, always, always. And at the Supreme Court level in states Supreme Courts, also big business versus the little guy that gets screwed. Now imagine you have a Supreme Court, you have 9 justices, and they're investors in the very companies that are coming before their court. Let's say Google comes before their court. They have Google stock. These other big companies come before the Supreme Court. They have stock in those companies, and they're investors in it. And we don't even know about it because the Supreme Court doesn't have to respond or show any data about what they're investing in.
Yeah, that's not right.
And they're going to decide the law of the land based on their own personal gains with investments in these companies. So Nancy Pelosi, I agree with you on this. It's a good diversionary tactic, though, to kind of take the heat off of yourself. But, I think this is a smart move. I think this is a smart move to make it government wide. If you like this content, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Also, we have a membership program. For the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support independent journalism just by going to morninginvest.com/join.
You get access to exclusive videos, plus the ability to join and chat with us live. We really appreciate your subscription, and you are supporting independent journalism.